Before the factories, before the empire's ledgers, there was the cloth. For centuries, India was the textile workshop of the world. Its weavers produced cotton goods so fine, so coveted, that they were traded from Europe to East Africa to Southeast Asia. The muslin of Bengal was the stuff of legend, woven so delicately that a whole length could reportedly be drawn through a ring. When the world wanted cloth, the world bought from India. This episode is a story of how that came to an end, how the workshop of the world was turned within a few generations into a captive market for someone else's cloth, and how a tariff, a tax written on a page in London, did much of the work. Begin with what India was. This was not a land of peasants alone. Spread across the subcontinent, in Bengal, in the south, in the west, was one of the most sophisticated textile industries on earth. Millions of people spun, wove, dyed, and finished cotton cloth, from rough everyday fabric to the legendary muslins of Dhaka. It was an entire economy of skill, passed down through families over generations. And it was an export powerhouse. Indian cloth was a global currency of trade. The very reason European merchants had come east in the first place, the obsession that drove our entire first series, was partly this: the wealth of the Indian loom. So hold that picture firmly, because it is the before. A country that did not buy its cloth from abroad. A country the world came to be clothed. Then the ground shifted. Far away, in the north of England, the Industrial Revolution gave Britain the power loom and the mechanized mill. In the mills of Lancashire, cloth could suddenly be made faster and in greater quantity than any handloom on earth could match. Britain became hungry for two things at once. It needed raw cotton to feed its machines, and it needed markets, somewhere to sell the flood of finished cloth those machines produced. India was the obvious answer to both: a vast supply of raw cotton and a vast population of potential customers. But there was a problem standing in the way, and it was India's own industry. India still made its own cloth, beautifully and cheaply. For Lancashire's cloth to conquer the Indian market, India's weavers had to be priced out of it. And here, the story stops being about machines and becomes about policy. This is the mechanism at the center of the episode, so let us state it carefully and fairly. Trade between Britain and India was not a fair fight, because the rules were not written by both sides. They were written by the side that ruled. Over time, a tariff structure took shape that tilted the field decisively. British manufactured cloth could enter India cheaply, with little to stop it. Meanwhile, Indian textiles trying to reach the British market faced duties that made them dear and uncompetitive. It was a wall built to let goods through in only one direction. The effect was as if the doors of India were propped open for Lancashire, while the doors of Britain were swung shut against the Indian weaver. The market that had once belonged to India's looms was opened up, by policy, to the looms of England. What happened next was slow and it was hard. We tell it without exaggeration because the plain version is heavy enough. As cheap, mill-made cloth flooded in and the export markets closed, India's handloom weavers were undercut. Many could no longer sell what they made. An old and proud livelihood, the inheritance of generations, began in many regions to collapse. Centers of fine weaving declined. People who had been skilled artisans were pushed, in large numbers, back toward the land and toward poverty. A line is often quoted about this period, and it is worth quoting with care. A British official of the era, and the words are most often attributed to the Governor-General, Lord William Bentinck, in a report from the early 1830s, described a scene in which the misery of the displaced cotton weavers had, as he put it, scarcely any parallel in the history of commerce, with the bones of the cotton weavers bleaching the plains of India. We pass that line on as what it is, the testimony of a contemporary observer inside the system, not a modern slogan. That a man of the empire wrote those words tells you how visible the damage was, even then. Now step back and watch the whole transformation in one motion. This is the entry for the ledger. India entered this era as an exporter of fine manufactured goods, among the finest in the world. India left it as something almost exactly inverted, an exporter of raw cotton, shipped out to feed foreign mills, and an importer of the finished cloth those mills produced. The workshop had become the supplier of raw material and the buyer of the final product. The value, the profit, the skilled work, the industry itself, had migrated across the sea. Historians call this process deindustrialization, and they debate it honestly. How total was it? How much was tariff and policy? How much was the sheer force of the Industrial Revolution that was reshaping the whole world? These are real arguments, and we will not flatten them into one tidy villain. The decline was uneven. Some Indian industry survived and, much later, revived. But the direction of travel is not seriously in doubt. India's share of the world's manufacturing shrank dramatically across this period, while Britain's grew. And a tilted set of rules helped decide which way the wealth would flow. So the pattern of this series tightens once more. The drain measured the wealth leaving, the railways carried it, the famines exposed it, and here, in the unmaking of India's looms, we see how an entire industry, the very thing that had drawn Europe east in the first place, was reshaped into a feeder for another country's factories. But there is one more trade we have not yet opened, and it may be the most uncomfortable account of all. Because the empire's books in India did not balance on cloth alone, or on grain, or on cotton. For decades, one of the single largest sources of the government's revenue came from a crop grown in Indian soil and sold, by force, into China. Next time, we open the empire's most poisonous account, the opium account. Tareekh ka Hisaab, history, audited. Hisaab abhi baki hai. The account isn't settled yet.